Story 1. The night shift attendant who wasn't there. Marcus Chen had been driving cross-country rigs for 11 years, and he prided himself on knowing every truck stop, rest area, and gas station along Interstate 80 from New Jersey to California. He knew which places had the cleanest bathrooms, the strongest coffee, and the friendliest staff. He knew the quirks of every location like the back of his hand. That's why what happened at the Sinclair station outside Elko, Nevada, on March 14, 2019, shattered everything he thought he understood about his route. It was 2:47 a.m. when his fuel gauge dipped into the red zone. Marcus had been pushing it, trying to make it to the larger truck stop in Wells, but his Kenworth was thirsty, and the desert night was unforgiving. He took the exit for State Route 225, where he knew a small Sinclair station sat alone against the dark Nevada landscape. He'd stopped there dozens of times over the years. Same layout, same flickering neon dinosaur sign, same elderly attendant named Earl, who worked nights and always had a story about his years in the Navy. Marcus pulled his rig alongside the diesel pumps, the air brakes hissing in the silence. The station looked exactly as it always did. Fluorescent lights buzzed inside the small convenience store. The Sinclair dinosaur glowed green against the black sky. 2 other vehicles sat in the parking lot, a Honda Civic and a Ford pickup, both empty. Everything appeared normal, except for one detail that Marcus noticed immediately. Earl wasn't at the register. Instead, a young woman stood behind the counter, maybe 25 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and a name tag that read Sarah. Marcus had never seen her before, which was odd but not alarming. Earl had to take nights off sometimes. Marcus stepped out of his cab, the March cold biting through his flannel jacket, and began fueling his truck. The diesel pump clicked and hummed as it filled his tank. Marcus watched the numbers climb on the display, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Through the windows of the convenience store, he could see Sarah standing motionless behind the register, staring straight ahead. Not at her phone, not at a magazine, just staring at the wall behind Marcus. Her stillness was unusual, but fatigue played tricks on perception at 3 a.m. When the pump clicked off at 142 gallons, Marcus replaced the nozzle and headed inside to pay. A small bell chimed as he pushed through the glass door. The store smelled like stale coffee and cleaning solution. Country music played softly from a radio behind the counter. Sarah didn't move or acknowledge his entrance. She remained perfectly still, her eyes fixed on some point beyond the windows. "Long night," Marcus said, approaching the counter. "Pump 4, diesel." Sarah didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't shift her gaze. Marcus felt the first tickle of unease crawl down his spine. "Miss? Pump 4." Still nothing. Her chest didn't rise or fall. Her eyes didn't move. She stood like a mannequin, hands resting on the counter, body angled toward the door, but looking through it rather than at it. Marcus waved his hand in front of her face. No reaction. His pulse quickened. He leaned closer and saw that her eyes were open, but completely vacant, like looking into the windows of an abandoned house. Her skin had an odd, waxy quality in the fluorescent light. Marcus reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched her hand. It was cold. Not cool, but genuinely cold, like she'd been standing in a freezer. And hard. Her flesh had the texture of firm plastic. Marcus jerked his hand back, his heart hammering. This wasn't a person. This was something else. Something made to look like a person. He backed away from the counter, his mind racing. The radio continued playing. The fluorescent lights hummed. Everything looked normal except for the impossible thing standing behind the register. Marcus's survival instincts screamed at him to leave, but he'd just pumped 142 gallons of diesel. He couldn't just drive off without paying. Could he? His gaze swept the store, looking for security cameras, for another employee, for any explanation. That's when he noticed the newspapers in the rack by the door. The Elko Daily Free Press. The date on top read, August 3rd, 2006. 13 years ago. Marcus's breath caught. He grabbed the newspaper, hands shaking. It wasn't yellowed or aged. It looked freshly printed. The headlines discussed local elections and drought conditions from 2006. He grabbed another paper from beneath it. Same date. He rifled through the entire stack. Every single newspaper showed the same impossible date. The unease transformed into raw fear. Marcus looked around the store with fresh eyes. The products on the shelves, the brands, the packaging designs. He walked down the nearest aisle, studying items. A display of Motorola Razr flip phones. Candy bars with packaging designs he hadn't seen in over a decade. A magazine rack featuring issues of Newsweek with cover stories about the Iraq war surge. Everything in this store was from 2006. But the building outside was real. His truck was real. The pumps had worked. The diesel he'd just put in his tank was real. How could this place exist in 2 times simultaneously? Marcus's eyes returned to Sarah behind the counter, still motionless, still staring. He approached again, fighting every instinct that told him to run. He looked closer at her name tag, and beneath Sarah, he saw a smaller text. In loving memory, 1981-2005. A memorial name tag for someone who had died. The temperature in the store seemed to drop. The fluorescent lights flickered. Marcus heard a sound from the back room, beyond the door marked Employees Only. A wet, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across a floor. He should leave. He should run to his truck and drive away and never look back. But Marcus had been raised to pay his debts, and some part of his rational mind insisted there had to be an explanation. A prank. A hallucination brought on by too many hours behind the wheel. Something. The dragging sound grew louder, closer. Marcus moved toward the door, propelled by morbid curiosity and a strange sense that he needed to understand what was happening. His hand reached for the doorknob to the back room. The metal was ice cold. He turned it slowly. The door swung open to reveal a storage room lit by a single bare bulb. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with products from another era. And in the center of the room, a dark stain spread across the concrete floor. Not old and dried, but wet and fresh, gleaming under the weak light. The stain led to the far corner, where the shadows were deepest. Marcus's eyes adjusted, and he saw a shape in that corner. A crumpled form. Another person, or something like a person, sitting with their back against the wall. An elderly man in a Sinclair uniform. A name tag that read, Earl. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered. Earl's head lifted slowly, mechanically, like a rusty hinge being forced open. His eyes met Marcus's, and they were the same vacant, empty windows he'd seen in Sarah's face. Earl's mouth opened, jaw dropping too far, wider than should be possible, and a sound emerged. Not words, not human. A low, sustained tone like an air raid siren, rising in pitch and volume. Marcus stumbled backward, his rational mind finally surrendering to pure terror. He slammed the door shut and ran, past Sarah, who remained motionless, past the outdated newspapers and ancient products, out into the cold Nevada night. He reached his truck, hands fumbling with the door handle. The siren sound had stopped, replaced by silence so complete It felt like pressure against his eardrums. Marcus hauled himself into the cab, fired up the engine, and didn't care about the unpaid fuel. He just needed to escape. As he pulled away from the pumps, he looked in his side mirror at the Sinclair station. The lights were off, completely dark. The neon dinosaur sign was dead. The building looked abandoned, windows broken, parking lot cracked and overgrown with weeds. No Honda Civic, no Ford pickup, no indication that anyone had been there in years. Marcus drove straight through to Wells without stopping, his entire body shaking. When he arrived at the large truck stop there, he went immediately inside and asked the attendant about the Sinclair station on Route 225. The attendant, a middle-aged woman named Dolores, gave him a strange look. "That place shut down in 2006, hun. Closed after that awful murder-suicide. The night shift girl and the owner. Real tragedy. Building's been abandoned ever since. They can't seem to sell the property. Folks say it's haunted." Marcus felt his knees weaken. Murder-suicide. Yeah, the owner, Earl something. He killed the girl who worked for him, Sarah, then shot himself in the storage room. Nobody knows why. He was always such a sweet old man. Dolores shook her head. "They found them days later. Why do you ask?" Marcus couldn't answer. He showed her his fuel receipt, the one that had printed automatically from his truck's onboard system, time-stamped at 2:52 a.m. The receipt showed the location as Sinclair Station, Route 225, Elko, NV. Dolores stared at it, confused. "That's not possible," she said. But it was. Marcus had 142 gallons of diesel in his tank to prove it. Real fuel from an impossible place. He'd purchased it from the dead, in a station that existed and didn't exist, trapped in the moment of its greatest tragedy. Marcus Chen still drives Interstate 80. He still knows every stop along the way. But he never takes the exit for Route 225 anymore. Some debts, he learned, aren't worth paying. And some places exist in pockets of time where the dead continue their routines, unaware or unable to accept that their moment has passed, forever serving customers in a station that serves as both a memory and a grave. He still has that receipt, though he's never shown it to anyone else. On sleepless nights, he takes it out and stares at the timestamp, the location, the impossible proof that he'd stopped at a station that hadn't existed for 13 years. And he wonders how many other places like that exist along America's highways, frozen in their worst moments, waiting for travelers who take the wrong exit at the wrong time. Story 2. The Woman Who Bought the Same Things. Jennifer Reeves had been a pharmaceutical sales rep for 6 years, which meant she spent more time in her Lexus than in her apartment. The territories she covered stretched across rural Missouri, and late-night drives between client meetings were just part of the job. She'd learned to navigate by gas station landmarks rather than GPS, because cell service was unreliable in the hills and valleys of the Ozarks. The Shell station at the intersection of Highway 32 and County Road J was one of her regular stops, a bright beacon in an otherwise dark stretch of road. On November 9th, 2021, Jennifer pulled into that Shell station at 11:43 p.m., exhausted from a presentation that had run hours longer than scheduled. She needed coffee, a bathroom break, and maybe something with enough sugar to keep her alert for the 90-minute drive home. The station was modern and well-lit, relatively new, with 6 pumps and a large convenience store that carried a decent selection of food and drinks. 2 other customers were inside when Jennifer entered. A man in his 50s wearing a Cardinals baseball cap, buying cigarettes and lottery tickets, and a woman, maybe 30 years old, with blonde hair in a braid, wearing jeans and a green winter coat. The woman was at the counter, placing items down while the cashier rang them up. Jennifer headed to the bathroom first. When she emerged 3 minutes later, the man was gone. The blonde woman was still at the counter, and Jennifer caught a glimpse of her purchases as she walked past toward the coffee station. A bag of Funyuns, a bottle of Mountain Dew, a pack of Marlboro Lights, and one of those cheap emergency phone chargers. Random assortment. Jennifer didn't think much of it. She poured herself a large French roast, added cream and sugar, then grabbed a protein bar and a bag of pretzels. As she approached the counter, the blonde woman was leaving, items in a plastic bag. She held the door for Jennifer, smiled politely, and walked out to a blue Toyota Camry parked by Pump 3. The cashier, a young guy named Tyler according to his name tag, greeted Jennifer with practiced friendliness. She paid for her items, made small talk about the cold weather moving in, and returned to her car. The blue Camry was pulling away as Jennifer started her Lexus. She merged back onto Highway 32, heading east. 15 minutes down the road, Jennifer realized she'd forgotten to fill up with gas. Her tank was at a quarter, which would get her home, but she'd have to fuel up in the morning before her first appointment. She mentally kicked herself for the oversight, then focused on the road and her coffee. 30 minutes later, she saw the familiar lights of the Shell station approaching at the intersection of Highway 32 and County Road J. Wait. That wasn't right. She'd already stopped there. She must be confusing it with a different station. But as she passed, she clearly saw the same layout, the same sign, the same building. Had she gotten turned around somehow? Had she accidentally taken a wrong turn and looped back? Jennifer checked her GPS, which had finally acquired a signal. The map showed her on Highway 32, heading east, exactly where she should be. She hadn't turned around. She hadn't left the highway. Yet she'd just passed the same Shell station again. A flutter of confusion touched her mind, but fatigue offered an explanation. All gas stations looked similar at night. She was tired and probably mixing up locations. She drove on, but 20 minutes later, her headlights illuminated the Shell station again. Same intersection, same building, same impossible location ahead of her, on a road she hadn't deviated from. Jennifer's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't confusion. This was wrong. She pulled into the station, her mind racing with possibilities. GPS error. Some weird trick of perception. Maybe she'd fallen asleep at the wheel and was driving in circles without realizing it. She parked and checked her phone. The time was 12:41 a.m. She'd been driving for 58 minutes since her first stop. She should be almost home. Instead, she was back at the starting point, or a place identical to it. Jennifer walked into the convenience store, needing confirmation that this was real. The same cashier, Tyler, stood behind the register. He looked up as she entered and smiled the same greeting. "Evening. Cold one tonight." "I was just here," Jennifer said. "Like an hour ago." Tyler's smile faltered slightly. "First time I'm seeing you tonight, ma'am." "No, I bought coffee and pretzels. You and I talked about the weather." He shook his head slowly. "Maybe you're thinking of a different station. We get a lot of customers." Jennifer looked around the store, searching for proof. The coffee station looked freshly stocked. The pot she'd taken coffee from earlier showed no signs of being used. Everything looked reset, as if her previous visit had never happened. Then the door opened, and the blonde woman in the green coat walked in. Jennifer's breath caught. Same woman, same braid, same coat. The woman walked past her without acknowledgement and headed toward the snack aisle. Jennifer followed, watching as the woman picked up a bag of Funyuns, then moved to the refrigerated section for a Mountain Dew, then to the counter display for Marlboro Lights, then to the rack of emergency chargers. The exact same items in the exact same order. "Excuse me," Jennifer said, approaching the woman. "Have we met? Were you here earlier?" The woman turned, her expression polite but blank. "I don't think so. I just got here." "You're buying Funyuns, Mountain Dew, Marlboro Lights, and a phone charger," Jennifer said. The woman glanced at her items, then back at Jennifer with growing concern. "Yeah, so? You bought those exact same things an hour ago. I saw you." "I just got off work," the woman said slowly, taking a step back. "I haven't been anywhere else tonight." Jennifer felt reality tilting beneath her feet. She watched as the woman paid for her items, the same small talk with Tyler, the same plastic bag, the same polite smile as she left. Through the windows, Jennifer saw her get into a blue Toyota Camry parked at Pump 3. This wasn't coincidence. This was repetition. The same loop playing out identically. Jennifer rushed outside. "Wait!" she called to the woman. But the Camry was already pulling away, tail lights disappearing onto Highway 32. Jennifer stood in the cold parking lot, her mind struggling to process what was happening. She got in her Lexus and pulled up her GPS again. She studied the route carefully, memorizing every turn and landmark. Then she drove. She watched the odometer, watched the mile markers, stayed rigidly focused on every detail of the road. 18 minutes passed, 23, 30. And then, despite having made no turns, despite following a straight highway, she saw the lights of the Shell station ahead. Jennifer didn't stop this time. She drove past, watching it in her rearview mirror. Then she did something desperate. She pulled over to the shoulder, turned off her engine, and waited. 5 minutes. 10. 15. When she started driving again, the Shell station appeared within minutes, as if the road itself was contracting, forcing her back to this single point. She stopped again, this time walking into the store, with her phone recording video. Tyler was at the counter. The blonde woman walked in seconds later. Jennifer filmed her buying the same items, saying the same things. When the woman left, Jennifer showed the video to Tyler. "This just happened 5 minutes ago, but it also happened an hour ago and 2 hours ago. We're stuck in some kind of loop." Tyler stared at the video, his face paling. "That's impossible." "Is it? How long have you been on shift?" "I came on at 11. "And what time is it now?" He checked his phone. 12:51. "It's been 12:51 for the last hour," Jennifer said. "Check your security cameras. Check your transaction logs. I bet you'll find the same purchases happening over and over." Tyler moved to the computer behind the counter, pulling up the security system. His hands began to shake as he scrolled through footage. The same customers appearing repeatedly, the same transactions, the same movements, loops within loops. "What's happening?" he whispered. Jennifer had no answer. She walked back outside, looking at the highway stretching in both directions. In the distance, she could see other headlights approaching from the west. She waited, watching as a blue Toyota Camry pulled into the station and parked at Pump 3. The blonde woman got out, walked inside, and bought Funyuns, Mountain Dew, Marlboro Lights, and a phone charger. Jennifer felt her sanity fraying. She got in her car and drove east again, this time pushing her speed to 80, then 90, desperate to break free from whatever this was. The Shell station appeared ahead anyway, as inevitable as dawn. On her 7th loop, Jennifer noticed something new. A car in the far corner of the parking lot that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had always been there, and she'd been too panicked to notice. A rusted Honda Accord, covered in dust, clearly abandoned. She walked over to it, shining her phone's flashlight through the windows. Inside, a skeleton sat in the driver's seat, still buckled in, hands on the wheel, wearing rotted clothes that might have once been business casual. A purse sat in the passenger seat, and through the open zipper, Jennifer could see a wallet. She tried the door, unlocked. Fighting her revulsion, she reached in and grabbed the wallet. The driver's license belonged to Amanda Pritchard. Date of birth, April 18th, 1971. The photo showed a woman in her 40s, brown hair, professional smile. The license had expired in 2014. Jennifer searched the car more carefully, finding a smartphone in the center console. Dead battery, but modern enough that she recognized the model. An iPhone 6, which dated to around 2014. In the back seat, she found a briefcase. Inside, sales materials for medical equipment, business cards, and a day planner with the last entry dated October 12th, 2014. Got lost trying to find Highway 32, the entry read. GPS not working. Stopped for directions. Strange loop. Can't seem to leave. Going to wait until daylight. Amanda Pritchard had been here for 7 years, trapped in the same loop. Eventually, she died in her car, and the loop had continued without her, stuck in its pattern. Jennifer looked at the Shell station with new horror. How many other cars were hidden in the darkness beyond the lights? How many other travelers had been caught in this temporal trap? She wouldn't end up like Amanda. She refused. Jennifer went back inside, where Tyler was still staring at the security footage in shock. "We need to stop participating," she told him. "The loop continues because we keep doing the same things. What if we change something?" "Change what?" "Anything. Everything." When the blonde woman walked in again, Jennifer intercepted her. "Don't buy those things. Buy something different. Anything different." The woman looked frightened. "Who are you?" "Someone trying to save us both. Please, trust me. Buy something else." The woman hesitated, then slowly put back the Funyuns and grabbed a candy bar instead. Different brand of soda, no cigarettes, no charger. When she paid and left, Jennifer held her breath. She walked outside and got in her Lexus. Started driving east. Watched the odometer. 10 minutes, 20, 30, 40. No Shell station appeared ahead. The road continued forward. Mile markers passed in sequence. Her GPS showed her approaching home. The loop had broken. Jennifer cried with relief, tears streaming down her face as familiar landmarks appeared. She made it home at 2:14 a.m., exhausted and shaken. She filed a report with the highway patrol about Amanda Pritchard's remains, giving them the exact location. When officers investigated, they found the Honda Accord exactly as Jennifer described, with Amanda's body inside. But they found 6 other vehicles too, hidden in the overgrown area behind the station. 6 other travelers who'd been caught in the loop over the years. 6 other people who'd run out of food, water, hope, and time, trapped in a repeating few hours that never progressed forward. The Shell station was closed pending investigation. Highway officials found nothing unusual about the location, no explanation for the temporal phenomenon. Within a month, the station reopened. Jennifer Reeves transferred to a different territory. She never drives Highway 32 anymore. But sometimes, late at night, she wonders if that blonde woman in the blue Camry made it out too, or if she went back to her routine, back to buying the same items, forever caught in the pattern that Jennifer barely escaped. And she wonders how many other places like that exist, scattered across America's highways, waiting for tired travelers who stop at the wrong place at the wrong time, trapping them in loops that don't end until you're desperate enough to break the pattern or willing enough to die trying. Story 3: The Children Who Weren't Real. Thomas Brightwater had been driving a metro bus for the Seattle Transit System for 19 years, but his side gig was what paid for his daughter's college tuition. 3 nights a week, he drove a luxury charter bus for corporate clients, ferrying executives between airports and hotels, or transporting wedding guests, or shuttling conference attendees. The hours were long, and the routes varied, but the pay was excellent, and the passengers were usually quiet. On January 22, 2020, Thomas was hired for an unusual job. An overnight route from Seattle to Portland, departing at midnight, arriving by 6 a.m. The client had paid extra for Thomas to stop at specific rest areas along Interstate 5 for bathroom and food breaks. Everything was handled through the charter company, and Thomas had his instructions on a printed itinerary. The bus seated 45 passengers, but this trip was for only 12 people. A private group, the dispatcher had said. Company retreat. Thomas arrived at the pickup location, a small parking lot near Pioneer Square, at 11:45 p.m. The luxury bus gleamed under the streetlights, a Mercedes-Benz Turismo, top of the line. He performed his safety check, ensured the bathroom was stocked, and waited for his passengers. They arrived at exactly midnight. 12 people moving together in a tight group. Thomas stood by the door, greeting them as they boarded. What struck him immediately was that they were all children, not teenagers, children, ranging from about 6 years old to maybe 12, all wearing identical dark blue windbreakers, like a school group, though no school would send children on an overnight bus trip without adults. Thomas felt confusion, then concern. "Excuse me," he said to the first child, a girl with dark hair and serious eyes. "Where are your parents? Your guardians?" "We don't need guardians," the girl said calmly. "We have our tickets." She held up a printed ticket, identical to what Thomas's company issued. Legitimate, paid in full, with the booking confirmation code matching his paperwork. But this wasn't right. Children couldn't book charter buses. Someone had to have made the reservation. "Who made your booking?" Thomas asked. "We did," another child said, a boy with red hair and freckles. "Can we board? We're on a schedule." Thomas's instincts screamed that something was wrong, but he was trapped by policy and procedure. They had valid tickets. The company had accepted payment. His job was to drive the route, not to question the booking. But children alone at midnight violated every safety protocol he could think of. He called his dispatcher. The phone rang 8 times before going to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He checked his cellular signal. Full bars. But nobody answered at the main office. The children waited patiently, silently, staring at him with expressions too neutral, too calm for kids their age. Finally, Thomas made a decision. He would drive them, but he would also make stops at well-lit, populated rest areas where he could contact authorities if needed. He wasn't abandoning children at midnight, but he wasn't comfortable with the situation either. "All right," he said. "Everybody find a seat and buckle up." The 12 children filed onto the bus in complete silence. They spread out, each taking a window seat, spacing themselves evenly throughout the 45-seat cabin. No pushing, no arguing, no typical child behavior. They sat like business executives, hands folded, staring straight ahead. Thomas climbed into the driver's seat, adjusted his mirrors, and pulled out of the parking lot. The bus handled smoothly as he navigated through empty Seattle streets toward the freeway entrance. In his wide rearview mirror, He could see his passengers sitting motionless. "So," Thomas called back, trying to break the eerie silence. "What brings you all to Portland?" No response. The children stared ahead, not at him, not at each other, just at the seats in front of them. "School trip?" Thomas tried again. Silence. He focused on driving, telling himself that shy kids existed, that maybe they were all exhausted, that there was a reasonable explanation for everything. But his hands were tight on the wheel, and his gut churned with unease. 30 minutes into the drive, as the bus cruised south on Interstate 5, past Federal Way, one of the children stood up. A small boy, maybe 7 years old, with blonde hair cut in a precise bowl shape. He walked down the aisle toward Thomas with mechanical steps, never wavering, despite the movement of the bus. "Sir," the boy said, his voice flat and emotionless, "we need to make a stop." "We're not scheduled for a rest area for another 40 minutes, Thomas replied, watching the boy in his mirror. "We need to make a stop now," the boy repeated, in exactly the same inflection. "Are you feeling sick? Do you need the bathroom? There's one in the back." "We need to make a stop now." Same words, same tone, like a recording. Thomas felt a chill crawl down his spine. "Kid, you need to sit down and buckle up. It's not safe to stand while the bus is moving." The boy didn't move, just stood there in the aisle, swaying slightly with the motion of the bus, staring at Thomas with unblinking eyes. Then, in unison, all 12 children spoke together. "We need to make a stop now." Their voices merged into a single eerie chorus, perfectly synchronized. Thomas's blood ran cold. This wasn't possible. They couldn't all speak in perfect unison unless they'd rehearsed extensively, and even then, the precision was inhuman. "Sit down," Thomas barked, his voice sharp with fear. The boy in the aisle tilted his head at an odd angle, too far to one side, like a bird examining prey. "We need to make a stop now," he said again, and the other 11 repeated it in chorus. "We need to make a stop now. We need to make a stop now. We need to make a stop now." Over and over, a chant that filled the bus, echoing off the metal walls, building in volume. Thomas's heart hammered. He looked for an exit, for a place to pull over, for anything. A sign for a rest area appeared ahead. Maytown Rest Area, 2 miles. "Fine," Thomas shouted. "I'm pulling over. Just stop." The chanting ceased immediately. Total silence. The boy in the aisle returned to his seat with those same mechanical steps. All 12 children sat motionless once again. Thomas took the exit, hands shaking. The rest area was small and poorly lit, just a parking lot with bathrooms and vending machines. 2 semi-trucks were parked in the far corner, drivers presumably sleeping in their cabs. Thomas pulled the bus into a spot near the bathrooms and opened the door. "Everybody off," he said. 5-minute break." The children stood in unison, like a choreographed performance, and filed off the bus in a single line. They walked together toward the bathroom building, moving in perfect synchronization. Thomas watched them go, then immediately grabbed his phone to call the police. No signal. His phone showed 0 bars despite having full service just minutes ago. He tried the bus's radio system. Static, the CB radio. More static. Every communication system was dead. Thomas looked toward the semi-trucks, thinking he could run over and get help from the drivers. But as he watched, the trucks flickered. There for a moment, then gone, then there again, like a glitch in a video game. Unstable. Unreal. The children emerged from the bathroom in their synchronized line. They walked back toward the bus, but instead of boarding, they stopped in front of the door and turned to face Thomas in the driver's seat. All 12 stared at him through the windshield. Then they smiled. All at once. Identical smiles, too wide, showing too many teeth. Not the smiles of children, the smiles of something wearing the shape of children. Thomas's survival instinct overrode everything else. He hit the door close button and threw the bus into gear, pulling away even as the children stood watching. In his rearview mirror, he saw them standing in a perfect line, still smiling, growing smaller as he accelerated onto the freeway entrance. His phone signal returned immediately. He called 911, his words tumbling out in a panic. A dispatcher tried to calm him down, asked his location, said they'd send a patrol car to check the rest area. Thomas gave them all his information, but didn't slow down. He wasn't stopping again until he reached Portland. For the next hour, he drove in terrified silence, checking his mirrors obsessively. The bus was empty. The children were gone. But where? They hadn't been on the bus when he'd pulled away from the rest area. He was certain of that. Yet his passenger count had been 12 when he left Seattle. Then he heard a sound from the back of the bus. A soft scraping, like fingernails on fabric. Thomas's eyes went to the rearview mirror, and his breath stopped. The children were back in their seats, all 12 of them, sitting in the exact same positions as before. When had they boarded? How? He'd never stopped. He'd never opened the door. Jesus Christ, Thomas whispered. The dark-haired girl from earlier stood up and walked down the aisle. Her movements were different now, less mechanical, more fluid, but somehow worse, more predatory. Thomas Brightwater, she said, and her voice carried tones no child should produce, harmonics and frequencies that hurt his ears. You didn't complete the route. Who are you? Thomas managed to ask. What are you? We are passengers. You accepted payment. You entered contract. You must complete the route. I'm driving to Portland. That's the contract. No, the girl said. The route has specific stops. You missed them. You must go back. I'm not going back, Thomas said, pressing harder on the accelerator. The bus engine roared. I'm taking you to Portland, and then I'm calling the police. The girl tilted her head, that same bird-like gesture. You misunderstand. You can't reach Portland. The route must be completed. Thomas looked at the highway ahead. The signs said Portland was 60 miles away. But as he drove, that number never decreased. Mile after mile passed, and the distance to Portland remained 60 miles. The road stretched endlessly, never bringing him closer to his destination. What's happening? Thomas demanded. You broke the contract. Now you're between. Not on the route, not off the route, between. The girl walked closer, and Thomas could see that her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, like looking into wells that went down forever. There's only one way forward. Complete the route. Make the stops. What happens at the stops? We get off. We get on. We go where we need to go. And if I refuse? All 12 children spoke in their terrible chorus. Then you drive forever. Between, never arriving, never leaving, forever. Thomas thought of his daughter, starting her junior year at UW. Thought of his wife, waiting for him at home. Thought of his life, his job, his future. And he thought of Amanda Pritchard, the woman who died in her car trapped in a time loop, driving the same stretch of road until she starved. Where are the stops? He asked quietly. The girl smiled, and this time it was almost gentle, almost human. We'll tell you. Just drive. Thomas drove. The girl gave him directions to exits he'd never seen, to rest areas that shouldn't exist, to places between places that had no names on any map. At each stop, Children got off. Different children got on. Always 12 passengers. Always silent. Always wrong. By dawn, Thomas was exhausted and broken. His sanity frayed from seeing things he couldn't explain and going to places that existed outside normal geography. When the girl finally said, "This is the last stop," he pulled into a rest area that looked exactly like the one where he'd left them behind. The 12 children filed off the bus. The dark-haired girl paused at the door. "Contract completed. You may return." "Return where?" Thomas asked hoarsely. "Home. But you'll drive for us again. Once you're on our route, you're always on our route." She stepped off, and the door closed. Thomas sat there, trembling, then finally put the bus in gear and drove. This time, the mile markers to Portland decreased normally. He reached the city as morning light broke over the Columbia River. He returned the bus to the charter company. His time card showed he'd been gone exactly 6 hours, a routine overnight run. But his memory held something impossible. His dispatcher asked how the trip went. Thomas said it was fine. 3 weeks later, he got another overnight booking. 12 passengers, Seattle to Portland. Midnight departure. He told the company he was sick. They rescheduled with a different driver. That driver never came back. His bus was found abandoned at a rest area with no name. Engine still running, empty. Thomas Brightwater doesn't drive charter buses anymore. He stayed with the city transit system, where routes are fixed and passengers are human, and nothing impossible can happen in daylight with witnesses around. But sometimes, late at night, his phone rings with a blocked number. He never answers, because he knows what voice would be on the other end, what request would be made. The children who weren't real need their driver. And once you've been on their route, you're always one call away from being back on it, driving through places that don't exist, carrying passengers that shouldn't be, completing a journey that never really ends, no matter how many times you reach the destination. Story Thupka 4, the station that served the dead. Rebecca Okonkwo had been a long-haul trucker for 7 years when she decided to take a different route through Wyoming on April 3rd, 2018. Usually, she stuck to Interstate 80, the main artery across the state. But construction delays and an accident had traffic backed up for miles. Her dispatcher suggested she detour north through the back roads, cutting through the empty spaces where Wyoming was more concept than civilization. Rebecca agreed, programming the alternate route into her GPS. The detour added 90 miles to her journey, but if it avoided a 4-hour traffic delay, it was worth it. She pulled her Freightliner onto State Route 789, heading north through landscapes so empty it felt like driving on another planet. Flat scrubland stretched to horizons, interrupted only by distant buttes and the occasional cluster of buildings that couldn't quite be called towns. By 10:30 p.m., Rebecca's fuel gauge was dropping toward a quarter tank. She'd expected to pass through Lander, where she knew there were multiple truck stops, but her GPS had routed her around the town instead, keeping her on increasingly smaller roads. Now she was on Route 135, and she hadn't seen another vehicle in over 30 minutes. She needed fuel soon. The Freightliner's diesel engine could go a fair distance on a quarter tank, but Rebecca had learned never to push her luck in empty country. Too many stories existed of truckers running dry in the middle of nowhere, waiting hours or days for help. As if answering her concern, lights appeared ahead. A gas station, small and isolated, glowing against the dark Wyoming night. Rebecca felt a wave of relief. She signaled automatically, though there was no one around to see it, and pulled into the station. The place was old. Not quaint old, but genuinely aged, like it had been there since the 1950s and never been updated. A single structure housed both the fuel pumps and a small attached convenience store. Two ancient pumps stood under a rusted metal awning. A flickering neon sign advertised gas, food, repairs, in letters that had probably been bright red decades ago, but now glowed a dim, sickly pink. No other vehicles were present. No signs of life except the lights and the open sign in the window. Rebecca parked her rig beside the diesel pump, which looked old enough that she wondered if it would even accept her credit card. She climbed down from her cab, the Wyoming wind immediately cutting through her jacket. It was cold for April, the kind of high-altitude cold that ignored the calendar. The pump had no card reader, just a simple mechanical meter and a notice that read, "Pay inside." Rebecca sighed and headed for the convenience store entrance. A bell chimed when she pushed open the door, the sound flat and wrong, like it was ringing in a vacuum. The interior matched the exterior's vintage decay. Narrow aisles lined with products that looked decades old. Canned goods with labels she didn't recognize. Candy bars in wrappers that hadn't been used since she was a child. A refrigerated section humming loudly, stocked with glass bottles of soda instead of plastic. Everything coated in a thin layer of dust. Behind the counter stood a man who matched his surroundings. Elderly, maybe 70, with deeply lined skin and white hair. He wore a mechanic's jumpsuit with a patch that read, "Carl." He looked up as Rebecca entered, his expression neutral. "Help you?" he asked, his voice rough, like he didn't use it often. "Need to fill up diesel," Rebecca said. "Pump 2. Carl nodded slowly and turned to an ancient cash register that had actual mechanical keys. "Pump's unlocked. Fill her up and come back to settle." Rebecca returned to her truck, unsettled but unable to pinpoint why. Everything about this place felt wrong, but nothing was overtly threatening. Just old, just empty, just strange. She fueled her truck, the pump working normally despite its age, and watched the numbers climb. While she waited, she noticed something odd about the convenience store windows. Through the glass, she could see Carl behind the counter, but his position looked different. He was standing in a slightly different spot, facing a slightly different direction than when she'd left him. The pump clicked off at 142 gallons. Rebecca replaced the nozzle and started back inside. The bell chimed again, that same flat sound. Carl was behind the counter, but now he was on the left side instead of the right. Had he moved? Why? 142 on diesel, Rebecca said. Carl looked at her with no recognition. "Help you?" Rebecca frowned. "I just came in. You unlocked the pump for me." "First customer tonight," Carl said. "What pump?" Confusion and irritation mixed in Rebecca's chest. "Pump 2. I just filled up. 142 gallons. You told me to fill up and come back to settle." Carl stared at her, his expression blank. Then he turned and walked through a door behind the counter, disappearing into what must have been a back room. Rebecca stood there, uncertain whether to follow or wait, or just leave money on the counter and get out. A minute passed. 2. Carl didn't return. Rebecca walked around the counter, against every rule of customer behavior, and pushed open the door he'd gone through. The back room was small, crowded with boxes and supplies. Carl stood in the center, facing the wall, completely motionless. Rebecca approached slowly. "Excuse me, sir?" Carl didn't move, didn't respond. Rebecca circled around to see his face. His eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing. His chest didn't rise or fall. He stood like a mannequin, frozen mid-action. Rebecca's heart began to pound. She backed away from Carl, her instincts screaming. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. She needed to leave. She returned to the front of the store and nearly screamed. Carl was behind the counter again, in a different position than before, staring at her with that same blank expression. "Help you?" he asked. "What the fuck is going on?" Rebecca demanded. "First customer tonight. What can I get you?" Rebecca's mind raced. This was impossible. She'd just seen Carl frozen in the back room. He couldn't be out here too, unless there were two of them, twins, some kind of trick. She ran back to the door to the back room and yanked it open. Carl was still there, frozen in the same position. She looked over her shoulder. Carl was also still at the counter. Two Carls, both real, both impossible. Rebecca fled. She burst out of the convenience store, the bell chiming that dead sound, and ran to her truck. She climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and started the engine. She didn't care about the unpaid fuel. She just needed to escape. As she put the truck in gear, she glanced at the convenience store one more time. Through the windows, she could see multiple Carls now. 5 or 6 of them, all standing in different positions throughout the store, all facing toward her truck, all wearing the same blank expression. Rebecca gunned the engine and pulled onto Route 135, her truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. She drove fast, faster than she should on an unfamiliar road, checking her mirrors obsessively. The gas station's lights receded behind her. 5 minutes passed. 10. Her heart rate began to slow. Whatever that place was, she'd escaped it. She'd report it when she reached a town with cell service. Let the authorities figure out what kind of operation was running there. Then she saw lights ahead. A gas station, small and isolated. The same rusted awning. The same flickering neon sign. Gas, food, repairs. No, she hadn't turned around. She'd been driving straight. The road hadn't curved back. This was impossible. Rebecca didn't stop. She drove past the station at 60 miles per hour. In her side mirrors, she saw the building receding. But when she looked forward again, it was ahead of her. Always ahead. No matter how far she drove, the gas station remained in front of her, an inescapable destination. After the 5th time passing and reapproaching it, Rebecca's fuel gauge caught her attention. Empty. The needle sat on E, and the low fuel warning light glowed on her dashboard. But she'd just filled up. 142 gallons. She should have hours of driving left. The engine coughed, sputtered. The terrible sound of a diesel engine running out of fuel. "No, no, no," Rebecca pleaded. But the truck was already losing power. She coasted to the shoulder, the engine dying, and came to a stop exactly in front of the gas station. Silence surrounded her. Rebecca sat in her cab, hands gripping the wheel, staring at the convenience store. Through the windows, she could see Carl behind the counter. Just one Carl now, standing exactly where he'd been when she first entered. She had no choice. She needed fuel. Her truck wouldn't run without it. And this was apparently the only gas station that existed on this road, repeating itself endlessly, waiting for her to accept it. Rebecca climbed down from her cab, every instinct screaming at her to run into the darkness instead. But the Wyoming night was cold and empty, and she'd die of exposure before reaching help. She walked to the convenience store entrance. The bell chimed. Carl looked up. "Help you?" "I need fuel," Rebecca said, her voice barely steady. "Diesel, pump 2. Carl nodded and turned to his ancient register. "Pump's unlocked. Fill her up and come back to settle." The same words. The exact same words. Rebecca returned to her truck and filled it again. The pump worked. The numbers climbed. Everything functioned normally, as if her previous fill-up had never happened. When the pump clicked off, Rebecca went back inside. Carl was behind the counter in the same position. 142 on diesel, Rebecca said. That'll be... Carl paused, consulting a rate chart that looked 50 years old. $418. Rebecca paid with her company credit card, expecting it to be declined or to produce some new impossibility. But the old mechanical card imprint machine worked fine. Carl processed the transaction, gave her a receipt, and nodded. "Safe travels," he said. Rebecca left, got in her truck, and drove. This time, the gas station receded behind her and didn't reappear ahead. The road continued normally. 20 minutes later, she reached a junction with Highway 287 and saw signs of normal civilization. A modern gas station with other vehicles, lights from a small town in the distance. She pulled over and checked her receipt. It showed the transaction, date, time, amount. Everything normal except the location, which was listed as Carl's Service Station, Route 135, Wyoming, followed by a string of numbers that didn't match any address format she recognized. Rebecca completed her delivery in Denver, but she couldn't shake the experience. She researched Route 135, trying to find information about Carl's service station. Nothing came up. No business listings, no reviews, no historical records. She even drove the route again in daylight, specifically looking for the location. There was no gas station. The stretch of road where she'd stopped was empty scrubland, with no structures, no evidence that anything had ever been built there. But her credit card statement showed the charge. $418 paid to Carl's service station on April 3rd, 2018. 3 months later, Rebecca was hauling a load through Nebraska when she stopped at a truck stop for coffee. While waiting in line, she overheard 2 other truckers talking. This weird old gas station in Wyoming. Rebecca's attention snapped to them. "Excuse me," she interrupted. "What gas station?" The older of the 2 truckers, a man with a thick gray beard, looked at her. "You ever take Route 135 through Wyoming?" "Yes," Rebecca said, her mouth dry. "I have." "Then maybe you've seen it. Old place. Looks like it's from the 50s. Guy named Carl runs it." "I've been there," Rebecca said. "What happened to you?" The trucker's expression darkened. "Same thing that happened to 2 other drivers I've talked to. You fill up, something weird happens, you leave. But the fuel you bought isn't really fuel. Or it is, but it's not from now. I don't know how to explain it." "What do you mean?" "Check your truck thoroughly after you've been there. Really check it." Rebecca felt cold. "Why?" "Because that place doesn't exist in normal time. It's a station for the dead, or for people who are going to be dead, or for trips that already happened. I talked to a driver who stopped there in 2015. He swore he saw his own truck parked at the pumps, with himself inside, already dead. Saw his own corpse through the window. 2 months later, he had a stroke while driving and died. Same stretch of road. His truck was found at the location where that gas station shouldn't exist." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that station serves people who are going to die on that route. Gives them one last fill-up before they reach the place where their trip ends. I don't know if stopping there causes the death or if it's just a warning, but every driver I've heard about who stopped at Carl's had something bad happen." Rebecca drove straight to a mechanic and had her truck inspected from top to bottom. They found a crack in her fuel line that shouldn't have been there, hidden and growing. That would have caused a catastrophic leak and probably an engine fire within a few weeks. The mechanic said it looked like aging damage, like the component had suddenly become decades older than it should be. Rebecca had it replaced She's still driving trucks, still hauling loads across America's highways. But she never takes Route 135 through Wyoming anymore. And when other truckers talk about weird experiences on the road, she listens carefully, cataloging the strange places and impossible stops that exist in the spaces between normal destinations. Because Carl's service station is out there, serving fuel to drivers who don't realize they're already ghosts, or soon will be. A way station between the living and the dead, where time doesn't flow correctly, and the attendant repeats his same motions forever, helping customers who may or may not still exist in the world outside. Rebecca keeps that receipt in her wallet as a reminder that some roads lead places they shouldn't. Some stops on the journey aren't on any map. And sometimes, when you need help most desperately, in the emptiest parts of the country, what comes to save you might be something far worse than being stranded would have been. Story number 5. The Hitchhiker Who Knew Everything. Daniel Park had been driving delivery routes for Amazon for 3 years, covering rural areas outside of Sacramento, where the suburbs dissolved into farmland and isolated properties. He knew the back roads and county highways better than the city streets, and he prided himself on never being late with a delivery. On August 17, 2022, Daniel had a late-night route that would take him out past Elk Grove into the agricultural areas beyond, delivering packages to farms and ranches spread across miles of dark countryside. His last delivery was scheduled for 11:45 p.m. at a property so remote that his GPS had trouble maintaining a clear route. Daniel didn't mind. He had a full tank of gas, a playlist of podcasts, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd complete another perfect delivery record. He dropped off the package, a large box of veterinary supplies, at a ranch gate, and began the long drive back toward civilization. The 2-lane highway was empty. No streetlights, no other vehicles, just Daniel's headlights cutting through the darkness and the occasional glow of a distant farmhouse. He was about 30 miles from the nearest town when he saw the figure on the side of the road. A man standing in the gravel shoulder, thumb out in the universal signal for hitchhiking. Daniel's first instinct was to drive past. He had strict company policies against picking up passengers, but something about the figure made him slow down. The man was soaking wet, clothes plastered to his body, as if he'd been caught in a rainstorm. Except it hadn't rained. The night was clear, stars visible overhead. Daniel's conscience wrestled with policy. The nearest town was miles away. If this person was in trouble, stranded and wet and alone, leaving them could be a death sentence. Daniel pulled over. The hitchhiker approached the passenger window. He was maybe 40 years old, with dark hair matted against his skull and water dripping from his clothes to pool on the pavement. His expression was neutral, almost blank. Daniel lowered the window. "You okay, man? What happened?" "Accident," the hitchhiker said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Need a ride." "Where to?" "Forward." The answer was strange, but Daniel attributed it to shock. Car accidents could scramble people's minds. "Get in. I'll take you to the hospital in Elk Grove." The hitchhiker opened the door and climbed in, leaving a wet imprint on the seat. Daniel noticed he wasn't shivering despite being soaked and the night being cold. No visible injuries either. No blood, no bruises, nothing to indicate he'd been in an accident. "What kind of accident?" Daniel asked, pulling back onto the highway. "Collision," the hitchhiker said, "with another vehicle." "Where?" "I didn't see any accident scene." "Behind you." Daniel checked his rearview mirror. The road behind was empty and dark. "I didn't pass any accident." Are you sure you're okay? Did you hit your head?" The hitchhiker turned to look at Daniel directly for the first time. His eyes were odd, too dark, like pupils had swallowed the irises. "Daniel Park," he said. "Age 28, lives at 4523 Fairfield Avenue, apartment 2B, Sacramento. Single, no children, works for Amazon, employee ID 5824478. Your mother's name is Susan. Your father died when you were 12. You have a sister named Michelle who lives in Portland." Daniel's blood turned to ice. His hands tightened on the wheel. "How do you know that?" "I know everything about you," the hitchhiker said. "I know you're afraid of dogs because you were bitten when you were 7. I know you failed your first driving test because you forgot to check your blind spot. I know you had a girlfriend named Alicia who broke up with you 6 months ago because you worked too much. I know you think about her every day." "Who the fuck are you?" Daniel demanded, his voice rising. "A passenger," the hitchhiker said calmly. "You picked me up. Now you have to take me where I need to go." "I'm taking you to the hospital, and then I'm calling the police." "No," the hitchhiker said. "You're not." Daniel reached for his phone to call 911, but his hand wouldn't move. He tried again, sending mental commands to his arm, but nothing happened. Paralysis crept through his body. He could still steer, still operate the pedals, but he couldn't reach for his phone, couldn't open his door, couldn't do anything except drive. "What are you doing to me?" Daniel gasped. "Keeping you on course," the hitchhiker said. "You have a destination." "We both do." Daniel tried to swerve off the road, to crash the van deliberately. Anything to stop this nightmare. But his hands wouldn't obey. They kept the van perfectly centered in the lane, maintaining speed, driving with mechanical precision. "In 2 miles," the hitchhiker said, "you're going to encounter another vehicle, a pickup truck driven by Travis Hernandez, age 53. Travis is drunk. He's been at a bar for 4 hours. He's going to drift into your lane at mile marker 47. If events proceed normally, you'll collide head-on at a combined speed of 110 miles per hour. Both of you will die." Daniel's heart hammered. "Then let me slow down. Let me stop." "I can't. This is what happens. This is what's supposed to happen. I'm you from the moment of impact. I'm the part of Daniel Park that exists in that final second before the collision. I'm your death, riding beside you, trying to warn you." "That's insane," Daniel said, but his voice shook. "You're not me. You're not my death. This isn't real." "Then why can't you move?" the hitchhiker asked. "Why are you driving to exactly the place I'm describing?" Daniel watched the mile markers pass. 45, 46, approaching 47. His mind raced, searching for ways to break whatever control this thing had over him. He tried closing his eyes. They wouldn't close. He tried screaming. No sound came out. He was trapped in his own body, forced to drive toward his death. "There," the hitchhiker said, pointing ahead. "Do you see him?" Headlights appeared, swerving slightly. A pickup truck, drifting over the center line into Daniel's lane. Daniel's foot wanted to hit the brake, but the pressure stayed constant on the accelerator. The truck came closer, headlights growing brighter. "This is where you die," the hitchhiker said. "This is where I was born, in the moment between alive and dead. I've been trying to warn you. I've been standing on this road every night since it happened, hoping that somehow, some version of you would see me in time to change things." "Then change it," Daniel screamed. "Let me stop." "I can't change anything," the hitchhiker said, and for the first time, emotion entered his voice. Sadness, resignation. "I'm already dead. I'm the memory of the impact. I don't have power over life, only over this moment, this repetition." The pickup was 50 yards away, 40, 30. "But you can change it," the hitchhiker said. "You're still alive. You still have 1 second left. Use it." Control flooded back into Daniel's body. His foot responded, slamming the brake. His hands jerked the wheel. The van swerved right, tires screaming, leaving the pavement for the gravel shoulder. The pickup truck roared past, horn blaring so close that Daniel felt the vibration of its passage. The van skidded, fishtailing wildly. Daniel fought for control, correcting the wheel, feeling the vehicle balance on the edge of rolling. Finally, it came to a stop on the shoulder. Nose pointed at a field, engine still running. Daniel sat there gasping, his entire body shaking. He looked at the passenger seat. Empty. No hitchhiker. No water stains. The seat was completely dry, as if no one had ever sat there. Daniel's phone rang, making him jump. He answered it with trembling hands. "Daniel, this is Marcus from dispatch." "Hey man, I just got a weird report. Highway Patrol says there was a fatal accident on Highway 99 at mile marker 47. Single vehicle, pickup truck. Driver was drunk and crashed after swerving to avoid something. They're asking if any of our drivers were in that area." "I was there," Daniel said hoarsely. "I saw the truck. He swerved past me." "Jesus, you okay?" Yeah, I'm okay." Daniel sat on the shoulder for 20 minutes, collecting himself. Eventually, he drove home, his mind replaying the impossible encounter. In the morning, after a sleepless night, he researched the area around mile marker 47. He found news archives from August 17th, 2021, exactly 1 year earlier. A fatal accident at mile marker 47 on Highway 99. 2 vehicles, head-on collision. An Amazon delivery driver named Daniel Park, age 27, and a pickup truck driver named Travis Hernandez, age 52. Both killed instantly. Daniel stared at the article, his hands numb. According to public records, he died a year ago. But he was alive. He was sitting in his apartment, reading about his own death. He checked his employee records. His hire date with Amazon was August 20th, 2021. 3 days after the accident that had killed another Daniel Park. He had no memories before that date. His earliest memory was his orientation, starting his job, as if his life had begun there. Daniel went to his apartment complex office and asked to see his lease. Signed on August 20th, 2021. He called his mother. She didn't know who he was. He called his sister Michelle in Portland. The number was disconnected. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same impossible conclusion. Daniel Park had died on August 17th, 2021. But somehow, some version of him had continued. A version that had been warned. A version that had avoided the collision. A version that existed in parallel to the death that should have happened. He returned to Highway 99 at night, driving the same route. At mile marker 47, he stopped and got out. The pavement showed no signs of an accident, no skid marks, no memorial, just empty road. But standing on the shoulder, Daniel swore he could see himself. A figure, thumb out, soaking wet, waiting for a driver who would stop, waiting to deliver a warning, waiting to save himself again, and again, and again, in every possible timeline where he might survive. Daniel got back in his van and drove away. He requested a transfer to daytime routes, city deliveries only. He never drives rural highways at night anymore. But sometimes, when he stopped at traffic lights, he sees hitchhikers on the side of the road, wet figures with blank expressions, and he wonders if they're all like him. People who died, but didn't, saved by their own deaths, existing in the narrow space between what happened and what should have happened. He wonders if he's really alive or if he's something else. An echo, a possibility. A version of Daniel Park that's neither fully dead nor fully alive. Driving routes through a world that may or may not be real. Warned forever by the ghost of his own final moment. Trapped in a second chance that might just be another form of haunting. Story number 6. The fuel that wasn't fuel. Patricia Knowles had been an independent contractor for oil companies for 12 years, driving tanker trucks that delivered gasoline and diesel to rural gas stations across Montana. It was lonely work, often boring, but it paid well and allowed her the independence she craved. She knew every station on her routes, every manager and owner, every quirk of the aging infrastructure she serviced. On September 28, 2017, Patricia received an unusual assignment. Her dispatcher called with a special delivery request. A new station had opened on Highway 200 near Jordan, Montana, one of the most isolated regions in the state. They needed an initial fuel delivery, 8,000 gallons of unleaded gasoline and 4,000 gallons of diesel. Patricia would make the delivery overnight, arriving around 2 a.m. when the station was closed, using the standard procedure for unattended deliveries. Patricia loaded her tanker at the depot in Billings and began the long drive east. Highway 200 cut through vast stretches of emptiness, cattle ranches and badlands, where towns were 50 miles apart, and darkness was absolute. She'd driven this route hundreds of times, but never to this particular location. According to her GPS, the station was 30 miles past Jordan, which put it in the middle of genuine nowhere. She arrived at 1:52 a.m. The station was small and new, with modern pumps and LED lighting that seemed almost aggressive against the surrounding darkness. A sign identified it as Last Chance Fuel, which Patricia found grimly appropriate. This was probably the last gas station for 100 miles in any direction. The station was closed, as expected. Patricia backed her tanker up to the underground tank access points, consulting the delivery manifest for the proper tanks. Everything looked standard. She connected her hoses, checked the meters, and began the pumping process. The fuel flowed smoothly, the equipment functioning perfectly. While the tanks filled, Patricia did her routine safety checks, walking the perimeter, looking for leaks or issues. That's when she noticed something strange about the station building itself. The convenience store behind the pumps had windows, and through those windows, Patricia could see the interior was empty. Not just closed for the night, completely empty. No shelves, no products, no fixtures, just bare walls and floors. Patricia frowned. New stations usually had their inventory stocked before they opened. This place looked unfinished or abandoned, despite appearing brand new from the outside. She tried the door to the convenience store, locked. But peering through the glass more carefully, she saw that the interior wasn't just empty. It was wrong. The proportions were off. The space inside looked larger than the building could contain. The walls seemed to recede into impossible distances, and the floor had a texture that hurt her eyes when she tried to focus on it. Patricia stepped back, feeling uneasy. She returned to her tanker, where the fuel was still flowing into the underground tanks. She checked her meters. The numbers were climbing normally, tracking the thousands of gallons being delivered. But Patricia noticed something that made her stop breathing. The fuel gauge on her tanker hadn't moved. She was pumping fuel from her tank into the station's tanks, but her own fuel level remained full. 12,000 gallons should have emptied her tanker significantly. Instead, the gauge showed completely full, as if she hadn't delivered anything at all. Patricia's hands shook as she double-checked the connections. The hoses were properly attached. The pumps were running. The meters showed fuel flowing. But her tanker's gauge insisted she still had a full load. She considered stopping the delivery, but if she'd actually delivered the fuel and the gauge was just malfunctioning, she'd be liable for abandoning a job. She needed to complete the delivery and figure out the gauge issue later. 30 minutes passed. The delivery meters showed the full 12,000 gallons had been transferred. Patricia disconnected the hoses, secured them on her tanker, and prepared to leave. But before she drove away, curiosity compelled her to check the station's tank gauges. Access panels on the ground near the pumps allowed her to read the underground tank levels. Patricia opened them and checked each one. All showed empty. Completely empty. Not a single gallon of fuel in any tank. But she'd just pumped 12,000 gallons. She'd watched the meters count every gallon. Where had it gone? Patricia's professional pride warred with growing fear. She couldn't leave without confirming the delivery. If the fuel wasn't in the tanks, there was a massive leak somewhere. And that meant environmental contamination, legal liability, potential explosions. She had to find out what was happening. She grabbed a measuring stick from her truck's equipment bay, a simple dipstick used to manually verify tank levels. She opened the access port to the main gasoline tank and lowered the stick down into the darkness. The stick went down, and down, and down. Patricia had 20 feet of stick, more than enough to reach the bottom of any underground storage tank. But the stick kept descending, finding no fuel and no bottom. She fed the entire 20-foot length into the tank, and it never touched anything solid. Patricia pulled the stick back up. It was completely dry. No fuel residue. No indication it had touched liquid at all. She checked the diesel tank. Same result. Bottomless. Empty. Impossible. She was standing over holes that went down forever, into which she'd just poured 12,000 gallons of fuel. Holes that shouldn't exist. Holes that led nowhere and everywhere, swallowing what she'd delivered without trace. Patricia ran back to her tanker, fighting panic. She needed to leave. She needed to report this. But when she climbed into her cab and tried to start the engine, nothing happened. The key turned, but the engine didn't respond. All her dashboard lights were dead. The truck was completely without power. She tried her phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising in this remote area. But the phone itself was behaving oddly. The screen flickered with colors that shouldn't exist, patterns that made her nauseous when she looked at them directly. Patricia got out of the cab, her breath coming fast and shallow. She was stranded at an impossible gas station in the middle of nowhere, with no communication and no power. The LED lights around her seemed to pulse, not quite in sync with each other, creating a disorienting strobe effect. Then she heard the sound, a deep rumbling coming from beneath her feet. The ground vibrated. Patricia looked at the tank access panels, and horror flooded through her as she realized what the sound was. Something was coming up. The fuel she'd delivered was returning, but it wasn't fuel anymore. A dark liquid began bubbling up from the tank openings, thick and viscous, black as oil, but with rainbow sheens that moved against physics. It flowed across the concrete, spreading in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost intelligent. Patricia backed away, but the liquid followed her, defying gravity, flowing upward along the ground's slight slopes. Where it touched the station's walls, the building seemed to shimmer and fade, revealing the impossible interior she'd glimpsed through the windows. The convenience store was larger inside than outside, vast as a warehouse. filled with shapes that weren't quite objects and shadows that moved independently. The liquid reached her feet. Patricia tried to run, but her shoes stuck to the concrete. The black substance crawled up her ankles, cold as death, and where it touched her skin, she felt something else. Knowledge. Terrible, overwhelming knowledge. She understood suddenly what this place was. Last Chance Fuel wasn't a gas station. It was a collection point. A place where the boundaries between dimensions were thin enough that things from elsewhere could gather what they needed. The fuel Patricia had delivered wasn't being stored. It was being sent somewhere else, to vehicles that didn't drive on Earth's roads, to machines that served purposes human minds couldn't comprehend. And now she was contaminated. The substance crawling up her legs was marking her, claiming her, pulling her toward the impossible interior of the station building. Patricia screamed, a sound that echoed strangely in the empty night. She wrenched her feet free, leaving her shoes behind, and ran in her socks across the cold pavement. The black liquid pursued, but moved slowly, giving her time to reach her tanker. She climbed into the cab, locking the doors, even though she knew locks were meaningless here. The engine started suddenly, roaring to life without her touching the key. The dashboard lights blazed bright, then brighter, then painfully bright. Patricia didn't question it. She threw the tanker into gear and accelerated away from Last Chance Fuel, tires screaming, the massive vehicle swaying dangerously as she pushed it faster than was safe. In her mirrors, she watched the station recede. The LED lights were pulsing faster now, and the building itself seemed to be folding inward, the impossible interior consuming the exterior, the whole structure collapsing into the underground tanks that had no bottom. Patricia drove for 2 hours straight, not stopping, barely breathing, until she reached the truck stop in Miles City. She stumbled inside, barefoot and shaking, and collapsed in the restaurant. Other truckers gathered around her, calling for help. When the paramedics arrived, Patricia tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out jumbled and incoherent. They took her to the hospital, kept her for observation, diagnosed her with exhaustion and possible carbon monoxide poisoning from her tanker's exhaust. Her dispatcher came to visit, confused and concerned. He showed her the delivery manifest. Patricia, there was no delivery to Highway 200. Your assignment was for a station in Glendive. That's where you were supposed to go. You delivered there at 3:30 a.m. The manager confirmed receipt of the full 12,000 gallons. Everything's fine. No, Patricia said. I was at Last Chance Fuel, Highway 200, past Jordan. Her dispatcher pulled up a map on his tablet. There's no gas station on Highway 200 past Jordan. Nothing for 90 miles. Whoever told you to go there was wrong, but you ended up at the right place anyway. Glendive. The fuel's accounted for. Patricia checked her truck's GPS logs later. They showed her route went to Glendive, exactly as the dispatcher said. No deviation. No stop at Highway 200. Her tanker's fuel gauge showed she'd delivered exactly 12,000 gallons, with her tank now appropriately lower. But Patricia remembers differently. She remembers Last Chance Fuel, remembers the bottomless tanks, remembers the black liquid and the knowledge it forced into her mind. And sometimes, late at night, she feels cold wetness on her ankles where the substance touched her skin, even though there's nothing visible there. She still drives tankers, still makes deliveries across Montana's empty spaces, but she's learned to recognize the signs of wrong places. Stations that appear on routes where they shouldn't exist. Buildings whose interiors don't match their exteriors. Delivery orders that feel slightly off, slightly strange, directing her to locations that exist on maps but not in reality. Patricia refuses those assignments now. She's learned that some places masquerade as gas stations, presenting themselves as normal stops along normal routes, when they're actually collecting points for entities that consume what we pump into their endless tanks. Fuel that goes somewhere we shouldn't know about, powering things we shouldn't imagine, serving purposes that would break our minds if we understood them fully. And she wonders how many other drivers have made deliveries to Last Chance Fuel and places like it. How many have poured thousands of gallons into bottomless tanks? How many have returned with no memory of the impossible stops they made? Their GPS logs altered, their gauge readings corrected. Everything made normal except for the small cold spots on their skin, where something touched them and marked them as those who have seen behind the mask of reality. Story 7. The radio that played tomorrow. Vincent Torres had been driving Greyhound buses for 15 years, running the overnight routes that connected small towns across the Southwest. He knew the rhythms of these journeys intimately. The passengers who slept through the entire trip, the ones who couldn't sleep and stared out windows at darkness, the occasional drunk or troublemaker, and the quiet souls who just wanted to get somewhere with minimum fuss. Vincent prided himself on his safety record and his ability to handle any situation with a calm professionalism. On December 12, 2019, Vincent was assigned the Albuquerque to Phoenix route, departing at 11 p.m. and arriving at 7:30 a.m. 23 passengers boarded in Albuquerque, a light load for the 47-seat bus. Most were asleep before Vincent even pulled out of the station. He began the long drive southwest on Interstate 40, then south on Interstate 17, a route he'd driven hundreds of times. The bus's radio was temperamental, an older model that the company kept promising to replace. Vincent usually kept it on a classic rock station, volume low, just enough to keep him alert during the empty hours. Around 1:15 a.m., as he approached the Arizona border, the radio began to crackle with static. Vincent reached to adjust the tuning, but before he could, the static resolved into a clear voice. A news broadcast, professional and calm. Breaking news this hour. A Greyhound bus traveling from Albuquerque to Phoenix has crashed on Interstate 17 near Cordis Junction. Early reports suggest at least 15 fatalities. Emergency responders are on scene. We'll bring you more information as it becomes available. Vincent's hand froze on the dial. Cordis Junction was still 2 hours ahead of him, and the reporter had just described his bus crashing. The broadcast continued. The bus, operated by driver Vincent Torres, left the roadway at approximately 3:22 a.m. and rolled down an embankment. Witnesses report seeing the vehicle swerve violently before the crash. Authorities are investigating whether driver fatigue or mechanical failure was the cause. Vincent's blood turned to ice. The radio was reporting his own future crash. A crash that hadn't happened yet. A crash that was scheduled to occur in almost exactly 2 hours. He fumbled with the radio, trying to change the station, but every frequency played the same broadcast. Different reporters, different stations, all covering the same story. His crash, his deaths. 15 passengers killed in an accident he hadn't had yet. Among the confirmed dead are Maria Gonzalez, age 34, traveling with her 2 children. Vincent glanced in his rearview mirror. A woman in seat 14, sleeping with a child on each side of her. Maria Gonzalez, according to the passenger manifest he'd been given. Also killed was Robert Chen, age 71, a retiree visiting family. Seat 8, an elderly Asian man, awake, reading a book with a small overhead light. The radio was naming his passengers. People who were currently alive on his bus. People who would be dead in 2 hours if the broadcast was accurate. Vincent's training kicked in through his panic. If this was real, if he was actually receiving some kind of warning, he had 2 hours to prevent the crash. First priority, stay calm. Second, figure out what was going to cause the accident. Third, avoid it. He checked his instruments. Everything looked normal. Fuel, oil pressure, tire pressure, all systems functioning correctly. He reduced his speed from 70 to 60, then to 55. Slower was safer. He checked his mirrors obsessively, watching for vehicles that might cause an accident. The radio continued its grim coverage. Investigators are examining the bus's black box recorder and have found something unusual. In the final minutes before the crash, the driver appears to have been listening to radio reports of the crash itself, which would have been impossible. Vincent's hands gripped the wheel so tightly they ached. The paradox was dizzying. He was listening to reports of a crash that included reports of him listening to reports of the crash. A loop of causality that folded in on itself. A new voice came on the radio, identified as a transportation safety expert. This suggests the possibility that the driver was disoriented or experiencing a medical emergency. The erratic behavior in the final minutes indicates he was not in control of his faculties. "I'm fine," Vincent said aloud to the empty air. "I'm completely alert. This isn't a medical emergency. This is..." What? What was this? The minutes crawled by. Vincent maintained his careful speed, hyper-aware of every sensation, every slight drift of the wheel, every response of the brakes. At 2 a.m., he made a decision. He would pull over at the next rest area and keep the bus stopped until after 3:22 a.m. If he wasn't driving, he couldn't crash. "New information coming in," the radio said. The crash occurred despite the driver's apparent attempt to prevent it. Reports indicate Torres had pulled into a rest area approximately 20 minutes before the accident, but pulled back onto the highway shortly after. No, Vincent wouldn't pull back onto the highway. He would stay stopped. He would wait until dawn if necessary. He would not fulfill the radio's prophecy. A rest area appeared ahead. Camp Verde Rest Area. Vincent signaled even though no other vehicles were visible, and carefully pulled off the interstate. He brought the bus to a stop in a parking space far from the building, set the parking brake, and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was profound. Behind him, passengers slept or dozed, unaware of the death Vincent was desperately trying to avoid. He checked his watch. 2:14 a.m. 68 minutes until the prophesied crash time. The radio, which should have been off since he'd cut the engine, continued playing. Vincent Torres stopped his bus at Camp Verde Rest Area at 2:14 a.m., apparently in an attempt to avoid the crash he'd been warned about. However, at 2:37 a.m., he resumed driving due to disturbance from a passenger. Vincent's attention snapped to the mirror. His passengers remained still. No disturbance. No one was even awake. He would not resume driving. The radio was wrong. But at 2:36 a.m., a man in seat 23 stood up. He was tall, thin, wearing dark clothes Vincent hadn't particularly noticed when he'd boarded. The man walked down the aisle toward Vincent with deliberate steps. "Driver," the man said, "why have we stopped?" "Safety precaution," Vincent replied. "We'll be moving again soon." "We need to move now," the man said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "You need to drive." "Sir, please return to your seat. We'll be here about 30 more minutes. If you don't drive now, everyone will die." Vincent turned in his seat to face the man fully. "What did you say?" "The crash doesn't happen because you're driving wrong," the man said. "It happens because you stopped. The timeline requires you to be at a specific place, at 3:22 a.m. If you're not there, something else will come to collect these passengers. Something worse than a crash. "Who are you?" Vincent demanded. "Someone trying to help you understand. You can't avoid the destination. You can only choose the method. Drive, and 15 die in an accident. Stay here, and all 23 die in ways that have no explanation, no comprehension. Drive." The man returned to his seat without waiting for a response. Vincent sat frozen, his mind reeling. This was insane, all of it. The radio, the warnings, the passenger who seemed to know things he shouldn't. But if there was even a possibility that the man was right. Vincent checked his watch. 2:38 a.m. According to the radio's prediction, he should have resumed driving 1 minute ago. He made his decision. He would drive, but he would be so careful, so alert, that the crash simply couldn't happen. He would prove the radio wrong. He would save everyone through sheer force of will and driving skill. He started the engine and pulled back onto the interstate. The radio immediately resumed its broadcast. Torres is now approaching the location where the crash will occur. Dashcam footage recovered from other vehicles shows the bus driving normally until 3:21:47 a.m., when something appears in the road. Vincent's heart hammered. Something in the road. Not mechanical failure, not driver error. An obstruction. If he knew to look for it, he could avoid it. He drove with every sense on maximum alert. His eyes scanned the highway ahead, looking for anything unusual. His speed was moderate, giving him reaction time. His hands were ready to steer around whatever appeared. At 3:21 a.m., his headlights illuminated the stretch of highway near Cordes Junction. Empty road, clear night, no traffic, perfect conditions. At 3:21 Vincent saw it. A figure stood in the middle of the road ahead, not walking into the road, not emerging from the shoulder, just suddenly there, as if it had materialized. A person-shaped shadow with no features, no details, just a void in the shape of a human being. Vincent's training took over. He braked hard, pulling the wheel to the left to go around the figure. But as he turned, the figure moved to block him, appearing in his new path faster than anything could move. Vincent corrected right. The figure matched him, always in his path, always impossible to avoid. Vincent slammed the brakes fully, hearing passengers cry out behind him as they were thrown forward. The bus's anti-lock brakes pulsed under his foot. The vehicle slowed but didn't stop fast enough. They were going to hit the figure. At the last possible second, Vincent wrenched the wheel hard right, choosing the embankment over the collision. The bus left the highway, tipped as it crossed the shallow ditch, and began to roll. Vincent experienced the crash in fragmented moments. The world rotating, glass shattering, metal screaming, bodies flying. His own impact against the window. Pain. Darkness. He woke to the sound of sirens and shouting. Emergency lights painted everything red and blue. Vincent was still in his seat, held by his seatbelt, but the bus was on its side. He could hear moaning and crying from the passenger area. The smell of diesel fuel was overwhelming. Rescuers pulled him out through the broken windshield. Paramedics examined him. Broken ribs, concussion, various cuts and bruises, but alive. Vincent grabbed the nearest EMT's arm. "The passengers? How many?" The EMT's face was grim. 15 confirmed dead so far. More injured. I'm sorry. 15 dead. Exactly as the radio had predicted. Vincent had tried everything to prevent it, but the future had come anyway, following the script he'd been hearing for 2 hours. In the hospital later, police interviewed him. Vincent tried to explain about the radio, about the warnings, about the figure in the road. They showed him the dashcam footage from his own bus. It showed him driving normally, then suddenly swerving violently for no apparent reason. No figure, no obstruction. Just Vincent yanking the wheel and leaving the road. There was something there, Vincent insisted. A person, a shadow, right in the middle of the highway. The investigators found no evidence of any obstruction. No skid marks from another vehicle, no debris. Nothing to explain why Vincent had swerved. The official report listed the cause as unknown, possibly driver error or hallucination. Vincent was fired, of course. No company would employ a driver who'd killed 15 passengers. The lawsuits bankrupted him. His family left him. He lost everything. But he kept the radio from the bus. A technician friend salvaged it from the wreckage, and Vincent took it home. Late at night, when insomnia plagued him, he would turn it on and listen to static, searching for broadcasts from the future, searching for proof that what he experienced was real. Sometimes, very rarely, he would hear fragmentary voices, news reports about accidents that hadn't happened yet, warnings about deaths that were scheduled but not yet occurred. And Vincent understood, with the terrible certainty of experience, that there were events that couldn't be prevented, only witnessed from different temporal angles. The radio wasn't giving him the opportunity to change the future. It was showing him that the future was already fixed, already determined, playing out exactly as it had to. His passengers were always going to die. The crash was always going to happen. The figure in the road was always going to appear, or not appear, depending on which timeline you observed from. Vincent Torres doesn't drive anymore. He works overnight shifts at a gas station in Tucson, Arizona, serving travelers who are passing through, going from one place to another, following routes that may or may not lead them where they expect. And sometimes, when those travelers mention strange experiences, radios that behave oddly, warnings that seem to come from nowhere, Vincent listens carefully and nods, because he knows now that America's highways are haunted by more than ghosts. They're haunted by echoes of futures, by shadows of events that reach backward in time, by moments that exist before they happen. And the worst part isn't experiencing the impossible. The worst part is learning that knowledge changes nothing, that warnings are meaningless when fate has already decided, that you can hear your own death approaching and still be powerless to step out of its path. The radio sits on a shelf in his small apartment, silent most of the time. But on December 12th every year, Vincent turns it on, and he hears the broadcast, the crash, the casualties, his own name, playing on a loop, forever announcing the accident that happened 4 years ago, or 4 years in the future, or exists in all times simultaneously. A fixed point of tragedy that was always going to occur the moment Vincent Torres accepted that assignment, started that drive, and tuned the radio to a frequency that broadcast from tomorrow instead of today.